She hadn't even unpacked her bags. The trophy from Washington was still catching the light. The rankings had barely finished updating. Headlines around the world were still repeating the same phrase, career high ranking, biggest win of her life, when suddenly, none of that mattered anymore. Because a new story was already writing itself, and this one had nothing to do with what Alex Eala had done on the court. It had everything to do with what thousands of people were about to do before she'd even played a single point. That's what made Toronto feel different from the very first second. Champions usually walk into their next tournament wrapped in confidence. Some pull bigger crowds, some get extra media attention. But what surrounded Alex Eala the moment she landed in Canada wasn't ordinary post-title buzz. This was something else entirely. The tournament hadn't even started for her. Not one rally played, not one point recorded. And yet the entire tennis world had already turned its attention toward one player. Everyone wanted the same answer. Was Washington the start of something historic or just one unforgettable week that would fade like all the others? The answer arrived before Alex ever stepped onto a practice court. Tickets for her opening match started vanishing at a speed that stunned even veteran tournament organizers. Weekday opening round sessions at a WTA 1000 event almost never sell out. Fans usually wait. They save their excitement for the later rounds when the stars that remain are the ones still standing. Not this time. There was no waiting, no hesitation. Seat after seat disappeared as fans rushed to claim their place inside the stadium. Within hours, Alex Eala's first-round match didn't feel like the start of a tournament. It felt like the main event. And that raised one obvious question. Why would this many people fight for tickets to a first-round match? The answer had almost nothing to do with rankings. Just days earlier, Alex had completed the greatest tournament run of her career. She had taken down elite opponents one after another. She had handled crushing pressure with a maturity that stunned commentators twice her age. She had lifted the biggest trophy of her life. And overnight, she climbed into rarefied territory, a career-high ranking that placed her among the best players on the planet. She wasn't promising anymore. She wasn't a name people were still learning to pronounce. She had become one of the most electric players on the entire two-tier tour, and everyone wanted a front-row seat to whatever came next. Here's the thing about momentum in tennis. It's addictive. It's intoxicating. One incredible week can introduce a player to millions of new fans overnight. But keeping that fire alive? That's a completely different fight. Expectations skyrocket. Opponents study your game frame by frame. Every match suddenly carries weight it never carried before because people aren't watching out of curiosity anymore. They're watching because they believe they might be witnessing history in real time. That was the exact position Alex found herself in, and Toronto could not have handed her a bigger stage. The city is home to one of the largest Filipino communities anywhere in Canada. Long before Alex touched down, fans had already begun organizing. Families rearranged work schedules. Friends planned road trips that stretched for hours. Hotels filled up with visitors who had one single goal: to witness history in person. Across social media, the excitement built by the hour. Ticket confirmations, screenshots, countdown posts, Philippine flags folded carefully into suitcases, group photos already being planned before anyone had even left home. This wasn't fans preparing for a tennis match. This was a community preparing to welcome one of its own home. Because for so many of these supporters, Alex Eala wasn't just an athlete. She was proof. Young Filipino athletes growing up far from the spotlight suddenly had someone showing them that the biggest stages in world tennis weren't out of reach. Parents pointed to her story as living evidence that sacrifice, discipline, and belief could turn an impossible dream into something real. Kids who never imagined themselves competing with the best in the world now had someone who looked like them doing exactly that. That's why every match suddenly carried so much weight. People weren't buying tickets because they expected good tennis. They were buying tickets because they wanted to be part of something they knew they'd remember for the rest of their lives. And the tennis world had started to notice the exact same thing. Fellow players spoke openly about what representation does for the sport, how athletes like Alex pull in entirely new audiences, entire communities who never felt like tennis belonged to them. But just as important, how she carried it all. Because through every headline, every interview, every surge in popularity, Alex Eala never changed. That authenticity became her superpower. Every interview sounded real. Every thank you landed like she meant it. Every moment she spent with a young fan reminded people exactly why they fell in love with her story in the first place. Success hadn't changed Alex. It had simply let the rest of the world finally meet the person her real supporters had known all along. As opening night crept closer, the anticipation climbed to another level entirely. Camera crews multiplied. Reporters obsessed over the ticket demand nobody could explain. Analysts argued on air about whether Washington had permanently shifted the balance of the entire women's game. And every single conversation kept circling back to one question. Could Alex Eala actually do it again? It's a fair question to ask. Winning one major title is brutally hard. Following it immediately with another deep run? That takes something else entirely: physical endurance, emotional control, and a level of focus most players never reach. The celebrations from Washington hadn't even finished before another demanding week had already begun. There was barely time to breathe, barely time to recover, barely time to sit with what she had just accomplished. Professional tennis doesn't let champions pause. Ever. The next challenge is always waiting right around the corner, whether you're ready or not. For Alex, this wasn't only about winning another match. It was about proving Washington wasn't a miracle. It was proving Washington was the beginning of something much, much bigger. And judging by the chaos already surrounding her arrival, Toronto wasn't just hosting another tournament. It was preparing to witness the next chapter of one of the most captivating stories in tennis. The noise around Alex Eala wasn't slowing down. If anything, it was getting louder. Every hour brought a new headline, a new debate, a new reminder that something rare, something almost impossible to script, was unfolding around this one young Filipina. Players win titles all the time, but very few ever ride the kind of momentum Alex was carrying into Toronto. And here's what made it even more remarkable: none of it was manufactured. No marketing team built this. No campaign pushed it. It was created entirely and organically by thousands of fans who simply refused to look away. That's what made all the difference. By the time tournament week officially began, the entire atmosphere had transformed. Opening rounds are usually relaxed. Fans wander in late. They grab snacks, take photos of the grounds, casually settle into their seats. The real crowds don't show up until the semi-finals, when a title is finally within reach. Not this year. Long before the first serve was struck, the stands were already packed with an energy usually reserved for Championship Sunday. Philippine flags stretched across entire sections. Families in matching shirts posed for photos together. Kids held up handmade signs with Alex's name scrawled in bright, uneven letters. Every corner of that stadium was already buzzing. This didn't feel like an ordinary tennis tournament. It felt like a homecoming. That kind of atmosphere doesn't happen overnight. For years, Filipino tennis fans had waited for someone who could finally break through on the biggest stages of the sport. They celebrated every small win, every ranking jump, every sign that the dream was inching closer to real. Then Washington happened, and everything changed in an instant. Alex didn't just compete against the best players in the world. She beat them. She lifted the biggest trophy of her career with a composure that looked nothing like a fluke. It was proof, undeniable proof, that her rise wasn't built on potential anymore. It was built on results. That single victory reset every expectation overnight. Opponents could no longer underestimate her. Analysts could no longer call her an outsider, and fans could no longer keep her story to themselves. Alex had become one of the biggest draws on the entire Utah tour, and everyone wanted a front-row seat to whatever happened next. But underneath all of that celebration, there was a quieter truth waiting just beneath the surface. Championship weeks are exhilarating. They're also brutal. Winning a title demands everything: total physical commitment, iron emotional control, relentless focus that doesn't get to switch off. Every match drains something. Every interview eats into recovery time. Every celebration shortens the window before the next fight begins. While the whole world was still replaying Washington's greatest moments, Alex had already shifted her focus toward a tournament that would demand just as much from her all over again. There was barely enough time to unpack. That's the side of professional tennis most fans never see. The trophies are unforgettable, The turnaround is merciless. Travel schedules leave almost no room to breathe. One city bleeds into the next. Practice starts again the moment the plane lands. New opponents, new game plans. Every single tournament starts from zero, no matter what happened the week before. Nobody understood that better than Alex, and instead of letting the praise distract her, she stayed locked onto something far simpler. Keep improving. That mindset had carried her through her entire career. After every win, she looked for the lesson hiding inside it. After every loss, she searched even harder. Washington was never a finish line. It was one more step forward. And maybe that's exactly why so many people admired her. For more than just her results, she stayed approachable. She stayed grateful. She stayed grounded, whether she was speaking to a room full of reporters or spending an extra few minutes signing autographs for kids who'd waited hours just to meet her. Success had changed the size of the spotlight. It never changed the person standing inside it. And that connection with her supporters kept growing day after day. For countless Filipino families across Canada, watching Alex compete wasn't just an evening of entertainment. It was a moment of pride. Parents pointed toward the court, knowing their kids were watching someone prove that big dreams from small beginnings really could reach the biggest arenas on earth. Young athletes weren't just watching powerful ground strokes and clutch victories. They were watching possibility. Representation carries a kind of power that doesn't show up on a scoreboard. Sometimes it changes far more than the result of a match. And just when it seemed like the excitement couldn't climb any higher, something happened that reminded everyone exactly how much pressure this tournament really carried. Because while thousands of fans were preparing to cheer, one person had to walk out and face all of it alone. Alex. The packed stadium wouldn't win a single point for her. The headlines wouldn't return a single serve. The standing ovation wouldn't erase the exhaustion Washington had left behind in her legs. Once the match began, only tennis would matter. Every rally would demand patience. Every game would demand focus. Every single point would have to be earned, nothing given, nothing assumed. This is exactly where champions separate themselves from unforgettable stories. Can they embrace the spotlight without letting it swallow them? Can they turn overwhelming expectation into calm, controlled execution? Those questions were about to get answered, because waiting across the net wasn't just an opponent. It was someone determined to end the celebration before it ever really began. And fate had quietly set up something even more personal. Months earlier, Alex had walked off a court carrying a defeat she never fully let go of. She'd started brilliantly, only to watch the momentum slip through her fingers, leaving with the sting of knowing she'd let an opportunity get away. Losses like that don't disappear. They become fuel. Now, months later, that same rival was waiting again. This wasn't just another first-round match. It was a chance to prove exactly how far she'd come since that painful afternoon. Washington had given Alex a trophy. Toronto was about to reveal something even bigger, whether that championship had truly transformed her into a player who could handle absolutely anything thrown her way. And as the stadium lights blazed down and thousands of fans rose to their feet to welcome her onto the court, the next chapter of Alex Eala's extraordinary rise was finally ready to begin.